Dr. Anthony Chaffee, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me. Good to meet you.
I'm glad you could make it on. Just to give a bit of context to this conversation, and I guess how this has come about. I was at an event in Glasgow about 3 weeks ago. It was a fitness event at a gym, and I met a guy called Akis, and we got chatting away. He was asking me about my own career and what I've done, what I'm doing, and I said, I used to play professional rugby. And we got talking a little bit about his training. He was a guy who was, I think, he was about 47 years old, in really, really good shape, and lean, good amount of muscle mass on him. So, as I would normally do, you start to be quite inquisitive. What do you do? Would you train often? And he said, "Oh, I don't actually train too much." And I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." And I said, "What do you eat?" And he said, "Oh, I'm doing this carnivore type diet." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. I've heard a bit about this. I've explored that over the last sort of couple of years through Paul Saladino's work, Sean Baker, who I'm sure you're familiar with. But I had a really interesting conversation with him. And I guess from my own point of view, over the last couple of years, I've sort of played around with a few bits and bobs when it comes to certainly like my intake of red meat. It's certainly been upped over the last year or two, and I've noticed certain things have started to happen in my own experience. I don't seem to get ill anymore, colds and flus that are going around and things like that. So I'm really, really glad that you've managed to come on and join us here on the podcast today. I'm looking forward to delving into this conversation and seeing where it goes. But one of the other things that Akis said to me is, like, I'm surprised you've not heard of Dr. Anthony Chaffee, because he comes from a rugby background. He's played rugby at a pretty high level, and he talks about this in his podcast as well. So where I want to start with this is give us a brief synopsis of, I guess, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and it's great to be able to get this out to more people, especially in the rugby community, because this is such a weapon for any athlete. And I experienced this in, half of my, major playing career was doing a carnivore diet, basically because I learned in college doing botany, study botany and biology and cancer biology. And I just learned that plants contain toxins that they use to defend themselves. This is a very normal thing in the plant kingdom, and that these can be quite harmful to us, as you would imagine. That's sort of the point of poisons, is to not is to not be good for the thing trying to eat you. And so I just stopped eating plants altogether, and I defaulted into a carnivore diet. I ate meat and eggs by default, and I felt absolutely outstanding. And so that a good 5 years of my playing was just eating just meat, and I wasn't doing a carnivore diet because there wasn't anything by that name at the time, and I didn't even realize that I was eating an ancestrally appropriate diet, that what we've been eating for 2 million years plus, and that this is really what our bodies are designed for. But I felt better than I've ever felt my entire life. And I always kept trying to go back, like, why, between 20 and 25, I just never felt better in my entire life. At 25 and a half, I was playing rugby in England, for Newbury in the National One competition there. And before it turned into the Championship League. And sort of halfway through, I was just thinking to myself, like, why don't I feel as superhuman amazing as I normally do? And I sort of looked back, and that's when it started slipping off. And I started eating some of the meat I was eating just had a bit of breadcrumbs on it. And I was thinking, wow, dose makes the poison. It's not that big of a deal. Maybe I'll just include a bit of this a couple times a week. That was enough. That was enough to sort of take the shine off. And that was enough to open the door and start eating more of these things. So I know what a massive difference this makes as an athlete. So thank you for opening this up to your viewers. Hopefully, people get a lot out of this. So I'm an American medical doctor. I currently practice in Australia. I actually trained at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland when I was playing rugby in England. I just really liked traveling abroad. My grandfather was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, and he has a lot of great stories about living over in England and traveling and his experiences there. So I thought I'd sort of do a similar thing and do grad school overseas. Um, I came into the whole carnivore side of nutrition based on my experiences in my undergraduate degree, taking cancer biology, taking botany, understanding that plants don't want to be eaten just like animals don't, but they have different defenses. Animals can run away or fight back, plants can't, and so they're stationary. They need to use different defense chemicals. They use about 1 million different chemicals that we know of in a defensive manner. And so if you're not aware of that, you could sort of stumble into something that can harm you. Think about it this way. If you get lost in the woods and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant. Most people understand that if you go around start eating random leaves, you're going to get very sick or even die. So you have to be very careful about the plants you're eating because of these defense chemicals. But we think that the ones that are so-called edible, that don't kill you on the spot, are not only completely safe but good for you, which is an assumption, and it's not a safe one to make. And so you need to delve into that a bit more, which is what I've been doing in recent years. So I rediscovered a carnivore diet actually by watching Dr. Baker on Joe Rogan's podcasts sort of 6-ish years ago now. And my brother came to me and said, "Hey, there's this guy. He's a doctor. He played, high level rugby. I think he played like NPC level rugby in New Zealand, and like in his second year, like he just like went out and he got recruited to play rugby in Texas out of a gym, and he's just a big, strong unit." And one of his professors, he was in his first year of medical school, and one of his professors was a Kiwi, and he just said, "Hey, I can get you on this, pro level team in New Zealand if you want to go." He's like, "Yep, absolutely." Like just dropped out of medical school and went down and played rugby in New Zealand for a couple of years. Pretty cool. And then went back in and finished up medical school. And so he was on Joe Rogan, and I was just like, and my brother was saying, he's like, "Well, there's this doctor, he played rugby, and he's saying that you can get all your nutrients from meat, and you don't need to eat anything else." And at first, the same reaction that everybody gets is like, "Whoa, that's a bit weird. That can't be right." But then a little voice in the back of my head said, "Well, I did that for 5 years in my early 20s, and I've never felt better in my entire life. That was the period of my life where I've never felt better." So I was like, "All right, well, I'll take a look at it and see what I think." Within 5 minutes, I knew that he was really onto something, and in fact, I had a lot of other pieces to the puzzle that really fit in with the things that he was talking about on that Joe Rogan podcast, and I was very convinced, and I was like, right. I knew it. I knew that plants weren't a good idea. In fact, my cancer biology professor, something he said when he was talking about all the different toxins that were in plants and how they could actually be carcinogenic, this is why I stopped, was because we started talking about all the different toxins and how these could precipitate cancer, and be carcinogenic, mutagenic. It's something, actually, it's on the WHO website, that different plants that we eat as a main staple of our diet around the world can be carcinogenic, mutagenic, directly toxic, or deadly, disrupt hormones, and do end organ damage and neurological damage as well. And so he just said to us that he didn't eat plants, he didn't eat salads, he didn't eat vegetables, he wouldn't let his kids eat vegetables. And in his words, he just said, "Plants are trying to kill you." I was like, "Okay, no plants. I'm just not going to eat any more plants." And I just stopped. And so that was for that 5 years. And then I sort of slipped back off of it. I didn't realize how significant that was. And then I was watching Dr. Baker, and I was looking at that, and I was just like, right, that's what I was doing. I was just eating meat. And that's what we're designed for. We're apex predators. That was one of the first things I learned about human biology when I was a kid, was that humans are apex predators, top of the food chain for millions of years. Apex predators are by definition carnivores, right? That's what that word means, right? And so that's what I was doing. I was living as a carnivore. I was living as an apex predator, and I was getting perfect nutrition and none of these plant toxins that could detract from your health. And I was like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And at 38 years old, which is 6 years ago now, so I'm 43, turning 44 next week. And I felt fantastic. I felt like I was 22 again. And within 2 weeks, I just cut out the vegetables. I was eating very clean. I was just eating lean meat and some vegetables. That was it. And I didn't feel great. I didn't have great energy, and I was overweight. And I had just come back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh and the refugee camps there. And I was trying to get back in shape, but it just wasn't really going my way. And I just figured, well, I'm an old man now, so maybe that's just not in the cards. It's going to be a little harder. And no, within 2 weeks, 2 weeks of dropping the greens, I was just eating spinach, kale, and broccoli, and then lean meat. And I was limiting the meat, and I was eating a lot of vegetables, and I felt like garbage. And I just took those away, and I started eating a lot more meat and a lot more fatty meat, and like ribeyes, like just as much ribeyes as I cared to eat every day. I lost 10 kilos in 10 days, and all the inflammation left my body. my back didn't hurt anymore, my joints didn't hurt anymore, and I just felt amazing. And I said, right, it's time to go play some rugby. And I went back out, and I just felt fantastic. It was like I was 22 again. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I should ease into this because I haven't played a full season in 3 years. And I said, no, when I was in my early 20s, when I was doing this before, I could just go as hard as I could, and my body just never gave up. Let's see if I can still do that. Let's see if it's a diet as opposed to the age. And it was. And I was able to just be at a full out sprint as hard as I could go uh, the whole time. And I went back out with Seattle, was my team growing up. I played with the Seattle Saracens. Previously, it was the Seattle Orcas. Now the Seattle Seawolves. That was the first year. That was the first year of the MLR. And so I was playing with them in the preseason, and unfortunately hurt my knee, so I wasn't able to actually play that year. But I felt fantastic, and playing in some premiership games like up in Canada, I felt fantastic. I just felt bloody amazing, and I just wanted to just keep getting out there and hitting people. I was 38, like I shouldn't be able to do that at 38 with no real training. So since then, just looking at this as a doctor, things started just making sense. Looking at medicine, looking at chronic disease, things started slotting into place. Looking at people's diseases, looking at their illness, it now made sense to me that we're carnivores as a species. That's just the kind of animal we are, and all animals have a specific diet that's biologically appropriate to them. This is why there's signs at the zoo and the parks that say don't feed the animals. It makes them very sick if they eat what they're not supposed to. We're animals too. And so those same biological laws apply to us. And so we're not doing that. We're just eating all sorts of nonsense. And so I started looking at that from a medical point of view. And I started saying, okay, well, what if these diseases, these chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune diseases, Alzheimer's, autism, mental health issues, schizophrenia, depression, all these sorts of things. Well, what if these are actually just our bodies going a bit haywire because we're getting mixed up with these plant toxins and defense chemicals, and we're not getting proper nutrition? And I started digging through the literature, and that's actually what I found. I actually found that there's a very strong case to be made for this. And so I've started advocating for this with my patients. I've started, sort of really digging into that side of things. And I've seen just absolutely miraculous results with people. And there are a lot of people, a lot of researchers that don't necessarily do carnivore, but they're discovering exactly what I'm discovering. Like Professor Chris Palmer from Harvard, he's a professor of psychiatry, wrote a book called Brain Energy. He found that he put people just on a high fat, meat based ketogenic diet. He's reversing schizophrenia, reversing major depression, reversing OCD, and bipolar disorder. So, I mean, these are major, major, major accomplishments simply with dietary changes. So, that's sort of where I am. And I'm just trying to advocate for people to get healthy, to start eating a biologically appropriate diet, improving their health, improving their athletic performance, and just improving their lives. And so we're not beholden to the pharmaceutical industries, to the food industries, and we save ourselves, you know, $5-6 trillion a year on unnecessary medical expenses that we can just use to actually just enjoy our life. So that's sort of where I am.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's certainly confronting. I remember when I first heard about this, way of eating. It was actually Jordan Peterson that was talking about it. I know he had
Mm.
some issues with an autoimmune disease that had been, sort of plaguing him over his whole life, I think. And I think his daughter had something similar. But I remember when I first heard about him only eating red meat, I could not believe it because I guess we're brought up in a culture, certainly Western culture, where we're sort of we believe and we're taught that too much meat is not good for us, especially red meat. So I think it is such a confronting thing. Um, I want to delve into that, but I actually want to try and understand what your life looks like at the same time, because this is something that from what I've gathered and sort of what I've watched of your content so far, this is something that you talk about, but you actually, am I right in saying that you work as a neurosurgeon in a hospital as well, and this is something that you almost do out with that? I know it all ties in together, but am I right in saying that?
Yeah, so I'm a neurosurgical resident, sort of. I delayed medical school by about 10 years after my undergraduate degree. Playing rugby and traveling and things like that, and then I was doing humanitarian work and took some time off as well. So I'm sort of had a couple pulled back. So I'm still doing residency, but yeah, so I'm in neurosurgery, and that's the main focus, and that's what I really enjoy doing. But yes, I'm doing this on the side, which is difficult to do when you have a hectic schedule at the hospital. But it's something that I see provides so much help for people that I can't not do it, and I can't not recommend it to people. And when you have people in neurosurgery, a lot of times you're catching people after there's a major problem, and so diet isn't necessarily the right fix for it. It may help, even especially with cancer. So I do I'm trying to get, I'm sort of more involved in the research side of things in cancer, and there's quite a lot of research and human trials and a lot of animal trials showing that different dietary measures is actually extremely powerful in the treatment of cancer, simply because cancer cells require 400 times the amount of glucose, blood sugar, that normal cells do, because they have damaged mitochondria. They don't function properly. It's called the Warburg effect, named after Otto Warburg, who's a Nobel Prize winner in medicine and physiology 100 years ago. And he did like 50 solid years of research on this sort of field. And so this is something that we've seen in clinical trials helping people, and things like GBM, glioblastoma, brain cancer is one of the most aggressive cancers out there. If without treatment, you have a 3-month life expectancy from diagnosis. With all the treatments, surgery, if it is even operable, chemo, radiation, you get about 15 to 18 months, you know, on average. There's obviously people that are above or below that. And yet there are people that just do ketogenic diets or carnivore diets, which are ketogenic diets. If you're only eating meat, you're not getting in any carbs or sugar. And it's very important to reduce that, especially for cancer. There are people that are living a decade and are in medical school. So there's a young man named Andrew Scarborough, who's in medical school, and he's doing research out of Charing Cross Hospital in the UK on this, and putting people through human trials and clinical trials with ketogenic diets and things like that. He has GBM, and he's one of the longest survivors with GBM, and he's said no thank you to the chemo and radiation, basically because the type of GBM that he has isn't really amenable to chemo and radiation, wouldn't have gotten much out of it. So he just said, okay, I'm just going to look at other things. And so, this is something that can be very powerful. So in neurosurgery, that's a very strong thing. But you have a big tumor in your head, someone needs surgery, they just need surgery, and then diet's sort of secondary. And I also have a practice outside of that in preventative medicine, or what's sometimes called functional medicine, where I do get to sit down with people. I do get to have longer conversations with them and talk about diet and lifestyle, and try to see what all their problems are, and try to sort of come at it from a holistic point of view and get them better so that they don't have the problems in the first place. And some people just have issues and they want a different approach. Traditional sort of medications aren't really helping them. They're all autoimmune diseases, diabetes, and they're just getting pills thrown at them and they feel miserable. They're like, is there any other way to do it? And so we sort of take a more diet and lifestyle approach to it. And a lot of times people are able to come off their medications. And then largely because I thought that I had something useful to say, but also because I had these conversations with people, and I would come in and say, hey, look, you had this situation. Actually, has everyone ever told you that there's actually studies that show that these sort of dietary interventions can actually really help you? And they're like, no one's ever said that. My doctors always said, does diet change anything? They say, nope, diet has nothing to do with this. I'm like, yeah, well, here's about 8 studies that say the opposite. And so, maybe look into those. And that would always open up more questions and more questions and more questions. Like you say, well, meat's bad for you, isn't it? Red meat, doesn't that cause cancer? I have cancer. I don't want to make it worse with this red meat stuff. What about heart disease? What about this? What about that? And so you have to have these conversations. They're very important to have. They're very legitimate questions. And one thing that I was finding was I was having very long conversations. I'm supposed to have like a 10, 15-minute consultation with someone, and it ends up stretching out 45 minutes or an hour. And I'm like, yeah, I can't do that. I've got 30 people to see. And so I started making these videos and said, listen, here's the prep. Just take a look at these videos and see what you think. And you can always shoot me some messages and things like that. And so, yeah, so I sort of had 3 jobs. And so my main one being in neurosurgery, the day ins and outs in the hospital, with patients and surgery in the clinics and things like that. And then on my off days, I'm in my practice in functional medicine. And then in any sort of free time outside of those, I'm trying to make videos and do interviews because I think that's probably the best way to get the information out there. Obviously, this is how you reach the most people is over the internet.
Amazing. So let's go back to the whole why we believe meat is bad for us, especially red meat. I mean, as I said, I've sort of upped my own consumption of red meat over the last 18 months. I seem to not get ill anymore. That's the only real thing that I've changed in my diet. But I've sort of come up against people who have made comments to me like, oh, you're eating red meat maybe 5 times a week. Like, do you know that that can cause cancer? Do you know that that can, you know, do these sort of things to the body? And obviously, having listened to some sort of, experienced people in carnivore and who talk about this, you begin to realize that maybe that's not quite so. So, why is red meat regarded as being a food that causes issues? And really, what is the truth of it from your point of view and from what you've discovered?
Well, it really stems back from the vilification of saturated fat, blaming saturated fat and cholesterol for heart disease. Um, Heart disease is actually a very new phenomenon. It's the number one killer in the world, but it wasn't always. It became the number one killer in America around the 1930s. A decade before that, it was a very, very unheard of disease. 10 years before that was the very first diagnosed, autopsy confirmed death by heart attack in America. 1910. That was the first confirmed case of someone dying from a heart attack in America, and people didn't actually believe him. He published this. It was such a new phenomenon that he published this in the literature in 1912, and people were like, "I've never seen that before. Never heard of that. That's not something that happens." And so they didn't really believe that that was a thing. 10 years later, they started saying like, "Okay, we're seeing a few more of these. Okay, yeah, maybe there's something there." 10 years after that, it's the number one killer in the world. During that time, we actually started eating less meat. So we're eating X amount of meat in 1912. We're eating less than that in 1920 and 1930. In fact, 1920 and 1930 was the trough. That was the lowest point of meat consumption in 200 years in American history. So from 1800 to today, that was the lowest point of meat consumption in America. And it went down actually from that first time that no one said like, that's garbage. We don't believe that. Now remember that people were actually doing autopsies all the time. Someone died, they're like, yeah, dissections, dissections, dissections. That was a major, major job of doctors back then, was just doing autopsies and studying things. And you made your name by describing a new disease. You went down in history, Alzheimer's disease after Dr. Alzheimer's. I know nothing else about that man except that he that he described Alzheimer's disease again in the early 1900s. And before that, there was nothing in the literature that would have accounted for Alzheimer's disease. That was a new presentation of a disease. Okay. And people were living older. People say, oh, people died in their 30s. No, that's average life expectancy from birth. Socrates was in his late 70s when they killed him with a plant, by the way. And so, people would actually live quite a long time if they weren't killed in wars or famines or something like that, or infant mortality is like 3 out of 5, before the 1900s. So that was a huge, huge, huge killer back then. So the average life expectancy was low, but people actually lived a great deal of time, to a great age. So these are new diseases, and we were eating meat, we're eating saturated fat forever. We've always eaten saturated fat. In the entire history of humanity, of human existence, we have been eating meat. We've been apex predators. And so there's an immutable law of biology is that of adaptation. Life adapts or it dies. It goes extinct. We did not go extinct. Not only did we not go extinct, we thrived and we became the most dominant species to ever walk the earth. During ice ages, when we didn't have fur, we didn't have big teeth and claws and things like that. We had to figure out how to take down mastodons. And that's why we live in the society that we do now with the technology that we have because we had to develop our brains, we had to develop tactics, we had to develop tools, and as a result of that, we became one of the most dominant species to ever exist. And we did that by eating meat. If we were getting sick by that, if we were getting dying in our 30s, getting cancer and heart disease, and we're fat and miserable, how are you surviving an ice age if you're not in peak tip top condition? It doesn't work. Try go to northern Alaska, go into the Arctic Circle, see how long you last. If you're not in perfect shape. And what are the Inuits doing? What are the polar explorers doing? They lived as the Inuit did. They ate meat exclusively, and those are the ones that survived. The ones that tried to eat, like, bring bread and sailors biscuits and things like that, they got very, very sick, and they didn't make it unless they switched over to a meat only diet. And there's account after account after account after account of this. So it's a bit strange that these new diseases, this new phenomena and this upsurge in these chronic diseases are being blamed on our most ancient food source that has never caused disease. And we have clear documentation of that. So in fact, it was fraud that was perpetrated by the sugar companies, something called the Sugar Research Foundation, then called the Sugar Association, that looked at this. And there's actually studies and papers coming out showing that the rise in heart disease actually perfectly tracked the increased consumption in refined sugar. And we were eating a very small amount of this in the late 1800s. Now we're, the average sort of person in Western countries eating, I think, over 150 pounds, 170 pounds of sugar a year, which is just incredible. And this perfectly tracks with heart disease and the rise of chronic diseases, as do seed oils, which are brand new. Those are industrial lubricants back in the late 1800s. Then throughout the 1900s, they're like, well, we can actually just sell this to people, and they'll just eat it. And as that started going up too, again, perfectly tracks. That's correlation. It's not causation, but at least there's a correlation. There is no correlation between meat and heart disease, right? Because the early 1800s, we were actually eating more meat than we were throughout most of the 1900s, and certainly more than at the base in the 1920s and 30s, when we were eating the least amount of meat that we had in 200 years. We were eating far more meat during the 1800s, no heart disease. And so, people say, well, maybe we just weren't paying attention. Like, okay, yeah, because people that were born before 1986 are just retarded, right? That guy Da Vinci and Newton, I mean, they just couldn't find their ass from a hat. They just have no idea what's going on. If you have all these people dying of heart attacks, if everyone was eating a lot more meat and you're just dropping like flies, like, yes, you are going to see that. And you're going to do autopsies and you're going to be able to find that. People were actually, if people go back through a medical history and read these different textbooks and things like that from the 1800s, they are extremely detailed. They took exacting statistics. They were very smart people. They had to do a lot more with a lot less. Now we have iPhones. We can look things up pretty easily. They couldn't do that. They had to actually learn and remember things and figure things out for themselves. So they're actually much smarter and much more observant. So that doesn't pass muster. But the main thing is, even all that aside, it doesn't even matter, because sugar, seed oils perfectly track with heart disease. Meat does not. But the sugar companies actually paid for opposition research to come out. And so we actually know about this. This is not a matter of conjecture. This is not up for debate. This is a matter of historical record. The Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the top medical journals in the world, published in 2016 actual internal memos from the sugar companies, from the Sugar Research Foundation, detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar, or more likely to be sugar. In their mind, they thought it was more likely to be sugar. And then to exonerate sugar and say that it was safe and it was just an empty calorie, right? And actually, you should replace fat. It's like, well, you need these calories and you shouldn't eat it from fat. So, hey, let's have some sugar. It's free. It's cheap. It's just an empty calorie. That's all it is. Well, no, it's not actually. It's a toxic substance that's not good for you. One of those professors was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease and saturated fat increased cholesterol. So stop eating both. And that was the initial vilification of meat. And people listened. They stopped consuming red meat, especially, sort of replaced it with like lean chicken. So it was like less saturated fats. We reduced our saturated, seriously reduced our animal fat intake. In fact, there's a graph that Nina Teicholz, who's a journalist, actually showed in one of her books, where consumption of animal fats sort of goes down over the course of the 20th century, exactly inversely to the rise in heart disease. So there's an inverse relationship between animal fat consumption and the rise in heart disease. So that was a fraud. We know it's a fraud. So why are we still worrying about saturated fat? Why are we still worrying about cholesterol? Well, people keep banging that drum. And the food companies are multi-trillion-dollar international conglomerates, same with the pharmaceutical companies. And they make trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars a year pushing that narrative, selling you the junk that makes you sick, and then selling you the Band-Aid to patch yourself up with as well. But that was the beginning. So meat was blamed for that. Red meat was blamed for heart disease. And then they just started tacking on everything else. So cancer started going. So what happened, right? We reduced red meat by over 33%, increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, increased high fructose corn syrup by over 3 times, increased seed oils by over 3 times as well. And what were the results? Well, first of all, the heart disease rates tripled in, since 1980. So you can't say that cholesterol and saturated fat and meat cause heart disease when you reduce all of those, and then heart disease rates triple. If anything, you could say those things are protective, and actually a lot of studies do show that exactly that they are protective. Even their studies, their data actually show that it was protective, and they doctored it. The Framingham study is a very famous study. It's a cardinal study in cardiology. The actual data showed that if you reduce cholesterol, heart disease rates go up. But the American Heart Association misrepresented that. They said exactly the opposite. They said, oh, if your cholesterol goes up, heart disease goes up. That's what I was taught in medical school. That's a fraud. That is not what their data showed. And so you have to throw all these sort of things out. Then they started, blaming other things too, because cancer rates tripled, stroke rate tripled, obesity rates increased massively. It went from like 8% to 42% in America. It went from like 6% to around 40% in England and the UK. And all these other things came up too: autoimmune diseases, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, neurodevelopmental delays such as autism. They all increased exponentially. They almost didn't exist in any to any great detail before the 1980s. Now they're a major part of medicine now, and they're sort of one of the major things that we treat. And again, people say, well, maybe we just weren't paying attention. Well, if you've had a family member or a friend or known someone with a child with autism, you'd be pretty remiss if you didn't notice that. It can be quite severe in a lot of cases. Or someone who has Crohn's disease and has bloody diarrhea 30 times a day. Like, you just didn't notice that. Doctors just didn't notice that. The person just didn't notice that. I'm sorry, that's ridiculous. So of course we would notice this. The rates actually went up. But you could say that in the 90s. Okay, well, we just weren't paying attention. Okay, well, why did they go up in the 2000s then? And the 2010s and now the 2020s? They just keep going up. And so obviously that's not a record keeping error. That's something in our environment is triggering this. And we're just going more and more and more plant-based. So everything just kept getting lumped into meat. And so, well, it's because you're eating too much fat. The obesity rate goes up. Well, if you eat fat, you get fat. Well, we're not eating fat. Psh, you're eating too much. There's all that steaks you were eating before. Now you got to cut it out. Well, we're eating less fat. We're eating less meat. And people are getting more fat. And the solution is eat less meat. Okay, well, you're not really getting it. It's like sort of like a government program, that there's like, oh, let's just throw money at it. It's like, well, it didn't work. Okay, throw more money at it. It's like, no. The policy's bad. Let's just do something else. And that's sort of the same thing. So meat has just been a scapegoat. Meat is a documented scapegoat for the sugar companies, the big processed food companies, which are all plant-based food companies, the food manufacturers. They make trillions of dollars a year pushing out their plant-based products. And so they want to do away with meat because plants are cheap and easy to produce, and they have a massive profit margin on these things. And then they get to sell you the drugs that go with them as well. So meat is just being used as a scapegoat. Cancer was another one. Cancer rates have gone up since red meat consumption has gone down. So we've reduced red meat by over 1/3, and cancer rates have more than tripled. These are American statistics. And so, I mean, how are we blaming that on red meat? The WHO said in, I believe, 2015 that processed meat, they classified processed meats as a known carcinogen. They know it, damn it. And then red meat was a likely carcinogen. This is a matter of opinion. This is not a fact. This was a board. They met, they voted, and that was it. There were people that were on the other side of that, on that panel in the WHO, who said, this is wrong. You guys, they looked at 800 papers. They threw out most of them, and they kept about 30 that fit their narrative. And so I forget the gentleman's name, but he said subsequently that that was the most difficult thing he's ever had to do professionally, because he saw them throw out hundreds of high level, high quality studies that showed absolutely no correlation between even processed meats, but certainly unprocessed red meat and cancer or any other health issue for that matter. And they were thrown out in favor of really poor quality junk studies that showed a loose connection between meat and cancer. And the problem with that was that the people on the WHO panel, these were all ideologically driven people. They were vegans, vegetarians, or members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which are actually, they're religiously anti-meat. They had one of their prophetess, the prophetess Ellen G. White in the 1800s, actually said she had a vision from God saying that meat was evil, it caused sins, caused lustful feelings, and lust was a sin, so we had to stop eating meat. So she codified that in religious doctrine, that meat is evil and should not be eaten. And there were are a lot of these people that are highly placed around the world, and unfortunately there were some of them on the WHO panel. And so he pointed that out and said, hey, look, you guys have a vested interest, you have an ideological bent here. You're not, you should declare your biases, and they refused. But people have subsequently come back out and published actual papers looking at the entire body of work. University of Washington in Seattle published a paper, a massive paper last year, looking at, I think, something like over 800 papers on this subject. And they found that most of these studies were junk, garbage studies. They were just absolute nonsense. And that the actual data, the actual good quality evidence showed no connection between meat consumption and even processed meat consumption and cancer rates, and especially not unprocessed red meats. And so also, if you think about it, if meat or red meat is, maybe it's a carcinogen, or really it's not, and then processed meats, well, maybe they are. Well, it's not the meat then, right? Because you don't process meat by adding more meat. You add plants, you add preservatives, you add chemicals, you add things to that that's not meat. That's what processed meat is. And so it's not the meat that's the problem. It's all the other stuff that you're adding to it. Again, it's the plants or different chemical toxins. I mean, we've created, I think there've been like something around 1 million different patents for different chemicals since the 1970s alone. So there's all these chemicals that have never existed in nature. And now they're in our food, they're in our containers, they're in our lives, our cleaning detergents and things like that. We have no idea what these things do to us. And we're adding this stuff to our food, and we're blaming a cow, for all these noxious chemicals that we're sort of adding to it. So that's the thing. I mean, these are all very legitimate questions, but it all comes back to the original vilification that was perpetrated to push a product, and it was a fraud. And since then, they've just used it as a scapegoat for basically everything else. And now they're just pushing this big plant-based agenda to just sell their wares.
It is crazy. It's just from the last 10 minutes there, you definitely get some insight into the fact that it's clear that meat has been vilified. But what is it about red meat that is so good for us? Like, how is that digested in our body, and what is it that makes it so good?
Well, simply put, it's what we're designed for. It's just, you think about, why is why are eucalyptus leaves good for koalas? Why is bamboo good for pandas? It's because that's what they're biologically adapted for. So again, the mutable law of biology is adaptation. We are extremely well adapted to eating meat. So we get everything that we need in the proportion that we need it from meat. And think about it this way, what are we trying to do when we eat? We're trying to build and maintain meat and bones. So what is a good thing to eat to get all of those, to ensure that you're getting all the building blocks to build and maintain meat and bones? Just eat meat and bones, right? And so that's going to have everything that you need by definition. So that's really why it is. It has people talk about, well, you need a balanced diet. What does that mean? You need a balance of different nutrients in the right balance, right? You need the right amount of the right things. That's what a steak is, a fatty steak. You get all the nutrients you need in the proportion that you need them. It's a perfectly balanced diet. Fatty meat, fatty red meat in particular. There are nutrients that exist in meat that are essential to life. You have to have them. You cannot survive without them. And they exist in meat and only in meat. They do not exist in plants. There is nothing in plants, in the entire plant kingdom, the entire fungus kingdom that exists. There are no nutrients in either of those that we have to have that we cannot get from meat. So it is perfect nutrition. And it's estimated there are over 50,000 micronutrients in red meat that are essential that we don't even have a name for yet. So we have no idea. But that's the main thing. There are nutrients in meat that you have to have that you cannot get anywhere else. So people say, well, you can do just as well on a vegan diet. You really can't. There are a lot of different nutrients that you simply cannot get. And the other ones may not come in the right proportions. Protein, you can get a complete protein, but it's not as bioavailable. It's not as nutritious. It's not the right proportions of the different amino acids. It's not just enough to get all the amino acids. You need them in right balance. If you're building a barrel to hold water and one of the staves, well, we've got all the pieces of wood, all the staves all going all the way around, so that's fine. That's a barrel. Okay, well, one of them's half the length of everyone else. Thing's going to leak. That's not going to be good enough. It's the same thing when you're trying to build proteins. You need all the amino acids. If you run out of a certain amino acid, you cannot build those proteins. It's just not going to happen. So if you're just short on one, shuts down the whole operation. So red meat is just exactly what we're designed to eat, and it doesn't have any of these defense chemicals. I mean, that's projection right there. I mean, that's pure Nazi propaganda. You're blaming the other side for what you're doing. And if you just keep repeating it, people believe the lie. There is nothing inherent in meat that is harmful to us because there doesn't need to be. A cow and a horse, they can run away, they can nail you with horns and hooves and stomp you out. If you get too close to a deer or a moose in the woods, they will attack you and they can kill you. They're not trying to eat you. They're just trying to make sure that you don't eat them. And so they have defenses. Plants are stationary. They can't run away or fight back like an animal can. So they have to be poisonous. A cow does not have to be poisonous. The meat is perfectly fine. There are smaller animals that have venom, but that's because they're smaller, vulnerable animals. And a cow's not. But when you get past the venom, like a rattlesnake or a cobra has venom, take out the venom sac, the rest of the snake is great. So it doesn't have to be inherently poisonous and toxic to things eating it like a plant does. There's nothing in meat that's harmful to you. And that's I think the biggest thing is that you get all the nutrition that you need from meat, and that's great. But it's not enough to just eat more meat. You really have to exclude all the different plants and breads and things like that because they actually cause direct harm to our bodies. And so they need to be avoided.
So, what does your diet look like? From what I've listened to in your content, your podcasts and stuff like that, it seemed like maybe 2 or 3 years ago you were obviously eating red meat, eggs, other types of meat, and that type of thing. But more recently, you seem to have moved towards just red meat, and you have a sort of system where you maybe eat once a day. Sometimes you might eat twice a day if you're working out and that type of thing. But explain to us um, how you eat and I guess like why you've come to the conclusion that that is the right thing for you and humans.
Yeah, so well, I try to eat intuitively, and if you look at animals in the wild, they eat very intuitively. I've never seen a koala pull out a calculator to figure out his macros. They just eat, and something there tells them, okay, I need to eat, and now I need to stop. Um, Same thing with lions. I mean, if you look at, people say that animals in the wild where their resources are scarce, and so they're just constantly fighting against entropy and starvation and things. That's not actually necessarily the case all the time. Koalas, they have like no real predators, and they're just sitting there, high in a eucalyptus tree. I think it's supposedly some sort of narcotic, so they're just teed off all the time, and they're just eating these leaves all the time. They have nothing to worry about, and so they're just eating leaves and hanging out stoned all the time. um they're not running out of resources. They're just sitting there eating leaves, and why aren't they horribly obese, and why aren't they getting diabetes and cancer and things like that? They really don't. A lot of wild animals don't get these things. These are diseases of civilizations. Even natural human tribes that eat predominantly meat or exclusively meat have extraordinarily low rates of chronic disease. In fact, in some areas, when they're really just eating meat, like the Inuits, before they became sort of bastardized by Western civilization, they had essentially zero chronic disease. And this was well studied by professors from Harvard, Weston A. Price, Vilhjalmur Stefansson, who was an ethnologist and professor there, and traveled and lived with them. So I try to do the same thing. If you look at lions, king lion, they take down a gazelle or a buffalo or something like that. King lion gets to eat before anybody else touches it. It's called the lion's share. He gets to eat as much as he wants of what he wants. So he gets first pick, and he just goes for it. So all the resources he wants, he could just keep eating until he just got sick and was bloated and go, oh my God, I can't believe I did it again. But he doesn't. He eats, and then something just goes, yep, that's enough. And he just stops, and then the other lions get to come in. So there should be some sort of natural switch. We have satiety signals, we have hunger signals. Why can't we listen to them? There's in the Japanese tradition, going back hundreds of years, I forget the name of the tradition, but it's basically you stop eating when you're 80% full. You always leave the table hungry because you have to. And when you're eating something that's not appropriate for your body, you can disrupt your hormonal signals. And so you actually have to micromanage it. You have to get the calculator out. You have to sort of start figuring, okay, how much did I actually eat today? If you're not doing that, if you're eating what your body's designed to eat, your body should be able to do that for you, like it does with every other animal on earth. And so that's what I try to do. So I go to first principles. What are we designed to eat? We're designed to eat fatty meat. So I eat fatty meat, and I eat until it stops tasting good. Your satiety signals, your hunger signals will be very different, because when you're eating carbohydrates, it raises insulin that blocks leptin, which is a satiety hormone, and it really disrupts how your body experiences hunger and satiation. So you can't really trust it. So when you're not doing that, when you're just eating meat, it's a very different sensation. You basically don't feel hungry. When I was doing this in my early 20s, I wasn't eating for like 4 days in a row sometimes. And I was like, this can't be right. I'm training for sometimes 6, sometimes 8 hours a day. I need to eat, but I thought to myself, I'm just not hungry though. And it got to the point where I was actually hurting myself, not eating enough. And I said, okay, it doesn't matter if I'm hungry or not, I need to eat. And so I'm just going to make it a point to eat every day. Now I sort of figured out that I don't feel hungry in a traditional way. And I've had to relearn my hunger signals, which I have at this point. But a really good marker is just going by how things taste. And people say like, well, I keep eating, and then like I have to force myself to eat for like, it takes me 2 hours to finish a meal. And I said, okay, well, did it taste good at the beginning? And they said, yeah, it tasted really good. And I got halfway through the plate, and it stopped tasting good, and I had to force myself to eat. Okay, well, that's when your body was telling you in no uncertain terms to stop eating. And so if you listen to that, then you can actually you don't have to count calories, you don't have to count macros, you don't need a complex equation or even an easy equation, which is sometimes things are way too simple. Just 1 gram of protein per kilo or pound of lean body mass. It's like, that'd be nice if it were that simple, but our biochemistry is insanely complex. So if you just keep eating meat until it stops tasting good, that's where you want to be. If a steak doesn't taste good, you're not hungry. But if it does taste good, you are. And so you should listen to that and keep eating. So for me, I listen to that. And so generally, I'm usually not hungry in the morning. I usually don't need to eat lunch. Usually just go through my work day. without eating anything, just maybe drink some water. At the end of the day, if I'm able to, I'll go to the gym if I have time. And although I really haven't had time to, today, I was telling you before, I was just signing up for the gym again. I haven't been to the gym regularly in probably 18 months at this point. It's pretty annoying because I haven't had time, but because of my diet, I maintain most of my physique. I don't get in less shape. I don't get out of shape. I can get in better shape, but I don't get out of shape. It's kind of fun, but I'm looking forward to getting back in shape. But if I'm just sedate or whatever, I'll usually not hungry until the end of the day, and I'll just eat. I'll try to make more meat than I think I'm going to want, and I just keep eating until it stops tasting good. I try to have leftovers. And so if I get through a steak and I'm just like, man, that was good, I think maybe I should cook another one, and then maybe I'll only eat a quarter of it or only half of it. But I know I'm satisfying my body's desire to get food. And that's really important. You want to make sure that you're getting enough. It's very easy to undereat on a carnivore diet. I did it. And a lot of people do it now too. And they're like, I'm losing too much weight now, which is, most people want that problem. But, that can be a problem. And so it's okay. You need to eat. You need to eat more. If I'm working out, my hunger will naturally go up. So people say, well, you need to have a caloric surplus if you're going to put on muscle. Well, what does that mean? Surplus to demands? That means you're going to put on fat. So you don't want a surplus. You want enough. You want enough protein. You want enough fat. And your body will tell you. You don't need to figure it out. You don't need an equation. And so if you're working out, if you're lifting weights, you're stimulating your body to grow. And your body's going to need more nutrients and materials to grow. And so your hunger is going to go up. And so in those cases, I end up eating twice a day. So usually on a normal a sedentary day, I'll have about a kilo of like fatty ribeye. And if I'm working out and lifting weights, and especially if I'm doing this regularly, that'll double easily. Well, I'll eat about 2 kilos of fatty meat. And when I do that, I put on muscle more easily now at 43 than at any point in my life, except for 22 when I was doing this exact same thing. So that's pretty much it. I just eat intuitively. I tend to eat later in the day because if you eat a big meal of fatty meat, you're going to get a bit lethargic because you go into a rest and digest state. You're dedicating 40% of your blood supply potentially into your gastrointestinal tract, and you just switch over into fight or flight, or sorry, from a active metabolism to a rest and digest metabolism. Just like a lion eats a gazelle and then it passes out for 12 hours, because that's their body saying, hey, we got our food, take it easy. And so, if you got to work that day, eating a kilo of beef in the middle of the day, you might feel pretty rough for the rest of the day, and you're not going to have a great workout. So yeah, so I just eat intuitively, eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. And that's usually once a day if I'm sedentary, and usually twice a day if I'm not.
You see a lot of people who do this type of eating and eat this way, and they're normally often quite lean and they have a decent amount of muscle bulk if they train.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
what is it that happens within the body? Obviously, this diet consists of virtually zero carbohydrates, which the body would normally use to energize itself if you were using them or eating them. But when we remove those, the body seems to start working off a different sort of function and system. Like, can you explain that to us and what that looks like?
Yeah, so there are two sort of main biochemical states that we sort of talk about, and sometimes they're referred to as the fed state, that you've eaten something, and sometimes it's the fasting state when you haven't eaten something. Now, my niece is actually going through biochemistry, and they sort of changed up some of the vernacular and said when you're eating carbohydrates, when you're not eating carbohydrates. So they've sort of figured that out because ketogenic diets are popular enough that you actually have to start addressing these things a bit better. Previously, they looked at this and they said, okay, when you eat, your biochemistry looks, it actually looks very different um, when you're eating carbs and you're not eating carbs. But previously everyone was eating carbohydrates, so they just thought this is the natural state. When you eat, that's your normal biochemical state. And when you don't eat for about 24 hours plus, they go into a fasting state, a starvation state. That's a very different metabolic state. Failing to recognize that when you eat anything at all except for carbohydrates, it also looks like that so-called fasting state. So now they're talking about it as eating carbohydrate state, not eating carbohydrate state. I think that eating carbohydrate state, that so-called fed state, is not our primary metabolic state. I think that's a pathological state. Our body's actually trying to protect itself from hyperglycemia, having too high of blood sugar. So when you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar actually goes up past where your body wants it. And this can be quite toxic. Our body at any given time only wants to have about 4 grams of glucose in it. If it goes up to as little as 5 grams of glucose, or just 1 gram extra of glucose, this is actually a toxic dose to your body. And your body responds to it as if it were a toxin and tries to detoxify it by raising your insulin, try to get that below that 4 gram mark. You can do this for a while, but eventually you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to get insulin resistance. You're going to have to start producing more and more insulin in order to get the same effect. And eventually you're going to burn out your pancreas's ability to do that, to make insulin and to overcome the resistance. And then you're going to start getting hyperglycemia anyway. And this is what ends up killing diabetics is that creeping up of the blood sugar, because those blood sugar molecules, the glucose molecules, physically fuse to other molecules called glycation. And so it's a non-enzymatic bonding of glucose or other carbohydrate molecules. Like fructose is actually more glycolytic. It's actually bond to more damage more molecules than glucose does. So this damages you. This damages the body, and this is why your body's trying to protect it. And then when you sort of overwhelm your body's capacity for that, then it starts causing all these damage. But that high insulin all the time is causing problems as well. High insulin, eating carbohydrates and raising your insulin, we said there's these two major biochemical states. So just eating carbohydrates and raising your insulin completely upends your entire metabolic structure. And so it changes your physiology. And I think in quite negative ways. People think, well, no, that's the normal way. No, just because it's common doesn't mean that that's what it's supposed to be. The so-called fed state, the non-carbohydrate driven state, that's actually the main biochemical state of most animals in nature. I'm not actually aware of any other animals that go into a different biochemical state, but carnivores and herbivores that eat fiber, which is most of the herbivores, they're all in this so-called ketogenic starvation state. And that's because they're not eating carbohydrates. 70% of animal species are carnivores. They eat animals with fat and protein, so they're getting fat and protein. And then herbivores that eat fibrous plants, they actually break down that fiber into, it's actually the bacteria that eat the fiber and then produce short chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated. And then the bacteria die off, and that's absorbed as protein energy. And so cows that just eat grass, gorillas that just eat leaves, giraffes that just eat whatever the hell a giraffe eats, they are eating leaves, they're eating grass, they're eating fiber, but what they're absorbing is fat and protein. So they're all in that non-carbohydrate starvation state. So it's not a starvation state. And also, you eat 4,000 calories in ribeye. Whatever you can say next, you can't say that you're in a fasting metabolism because you are not fasting. So what this does is it gets you back into a normal biochemical state. This is where all of our heavy machinery come to bear. And you don't need to eat carbohydrates because you make carbohydrates. It's a process called gluconeogenesis. You can make this from proteins. You can also make it from fats. And so now you're running on your fat stores. Your fat becomes your gas tank. It was taught to me in biochemistry 23 years ago that, well, this is just you get lost in the desert and you're roaming around for 2 weeks. You need your fat stores. Okay, well, that doesn't really make sense. It's like filling up your gas tank at your car's gas tank and then just putting a plug in it and not letting it go to your engine and be like, no, that's just in case we get lost somewhere. I'm just going to pour it in a can directly into the engine as I go. That's sort of what you're doing when you're eating carbohydrates. You're sort of locking down your fat stores. Insulin goes up, it forces energy into cells, it doesn't allow it to come out of cells, and it stops your body's ability to go through gluconeogenesis, to create ketones, to make blood sugar and things like that. So you've locked down your fat cells. And so when you go into what I think is our primary metabolic state, you take the chains off. You just take the anchor off and you just let your body work the way it's supposed to work. You'll have exacting levels of blood sugar and glycogen. And now you'll have ketones as well. And your muscles can actually run on ketones. People say, oh, no, you have to have, for high explosive sort of weightlifting or sprinting like rugby or something like that, you need glycogen, you need glucose. And then you'll show how that's not necessarily the case. You can actually do that on ketones. And they say, well, you can do high intensity stuff, but you can't do this long endurance marathon sort of stuff. And it's just like, yeah, you can. You do whatever you want. If you're talking about one, they're going to say you can't do the other. The fact of the matter is that a your muscles absolutely do run on ketones. They run just fine on ketones, but you make all the blood sugar that you need. You make all the glycogen you need. Now, a good question that I've heard asked is that, okay, well, if you're an athlete and you want those carbs up, you can make your carbs yourself, fair enough. But do you make them as fast as you would just sucking down a Gatorade? Right? That's a good question. The answer is yes. You actually make it faster. So there's studies in athletes showing that fat-fueled athletes, ketogenic athletes that make their own blood sugar and glycogen and ketones actually replenish their glycogen and blood sugar faster than carb-fueled athletes who are sucking down sugar water. So, and in the middle of a rugby game, you're not really going to have, a Gatorade handy with you all the time. And so, you need to run on your body's stores anyway. If you're a cyclist and you're just constantly drinking this stuff, you could, but you are going to run out of sugar, and you're going to feel pretty wretched until that stuff gets absorbed. It's actually quicker and easier for your body to make glycogen from your own fat stores than it is from taking in glucose. I was speaking to a professor of a now retired professor emeritus of medicine at UCLA, who's really a biochemist and a molecular biologist. He ran a biochemistry lab at UCLA named Dr. Laszlo Boras, and sort of mentioned this study to him. And he said, well, that makes sense, because if you eat carbohydrates, you eat glucose, it actually takes 10 metabolic steps, 10 chemical steps to turn that glucose into glycogen. Whereas with ketones in your fats, it's a direct transfer. It's much less chemical steps to turn that into glycogen. So, of course it is. Of course that's going to be faster. So there are also studies from Professor Tim Noakes, specifically in athletes, and he's one of the top sports medicine doctors in the world, sports physiologists in the world. And he, for decades, said, was a proponent of carbohydrates, and he thought that you needed to eat carbs in order to burn carbs. And about 10, 15 years ago, he realized, wow, I was completely wrong. And so he has tried to really, undo that way of thinking. And so he's done quite a lot of studies in human athletes, crossover studies. So he had, randomized controlled trials. We had, two groups of athletes, one or keto adapted, one fueled, and, put them on the treadmill, put them on the track, do 100-meter sprints, doing long distance endurance, so testing for sprinting, testing for endurance, testing for all these sorts of things. And he found that you had no drop off in performance if you were on a ketogenic diet, except that you now were tapped into your fat stores. So you were constantly replenishing your glycogen, so you could just keep going and going and going and going, and never needed to refeed, never needed orange slices at halftime and drinking Gatorades and power drinks and things like that. You can just keep going. Where the carb fueled guys did have to do that, but the initial burst, you didn't lose anything by just being in ketosis, and the long term you got much more out of it because you had more consistent energy ongoing. And then he crossed them over. So he had these guys, he had the keto guys start eating carbs, and the carb guys stop eating carbs. And then he tested them again in sort of a month and a half after they felt that they were fully keto adapted. They had no drop in performance, right? So there is nothing you get out of eating carbs of benefit, right? You're only slowing yourself down. You're limiting yourself. Yes, you carbo load, you've loaded up your glycogen, but now it's going to run out because your insulin's up. And now you're going to have to, you're going to go and you're going to hit the wall. Whereas if you're keto fueled and you're just making your blood sugar, you're making your glycogen, you're making ketones, you're just going to keep going and going because now you're running on your fat stores. Even on a slender person that doesn't have much fat on them, you'll have 10 to 20 times the amount of available energy in your fat stores than you will in a fully carbo loaded, glycogen filled person. It's just not even a comparison. And so you get the same output and performance and it doesn't stop. You don't run out of gas. So it's a massive, massive benefit to everybody, but in particularly high performance athletes, endurance or sprinting, powerlifting, things like that.
Does it take about 6 weeks to become completely keto adapted? Am I right in saying that? And do you think there would be like a disadvantage for an athlete to be, let's just say, eating like this for 3 weeks and then, going back to carbohydrates for 1 week and then going back to this, but obviously playing games every week and exercising? That's the question in my head. Like, is this all in, or is it, can you sort of mix and match a little bit? Do you still get the benefits?
You'll get a lot of benefits. The more you do it, the longer you do it, the more benefits you'll get. I mean, that's one of the things. The more months you're on this, actually, the more mitochondria you have. The mitochondria are the powerhouses in our cells. They're the ones that create ATP, which is the energy currency of cells. And not only do they just make energy, they actually physically move around the inside of the cells and actually run your cells. You can think of them like sailors on a sailing ship, right? So like an old school ship back in the 1700s or something like that. You needed these little sailors running up and down the mast and pulling the rigging and doing so. That's what your mitochondria are doing in your cells as well. When you eat carbohydrates, when your insulin is up, you actually stop them from turning over and making, recycling the old ones that aren't working as well, and it stops them from making more new ones also. So you have less mitochondria and they're older and more defective. You stop eating carbohydrates after about 3-4 months, you have 4 times the mitochondria and they're 4 times as effective. You also do something that's called mitophagy, the turnover of those cells and then of those mitochondria, and then you start producing more. And there's also things called autophagy, which is just the recycling of the internal workings of the cell or the entire cell itself. And so you can recycle different organelles inside the cells. You can recycle whole cells. And so your body goes through that over the course of months. Some people say that you can keep doing this and you'll keep getting added benefits and effects and more mitochondria over years. But it doesn't take years before you start, eclipsing where you were before. Um, it depends on your threshold for saying someone, is someone keto adapted or fat adapted. There are continuous changes that are happening that go on that can actually happen for years. And so, your mitochondria keep getting better, your autophagy, you're turning on stem cells, you're promoting different sort of factors and hormones, and that keeps improving as you go. But just from an athletic standpoint or just from an energy standpoint, quite often it's within a couple weeks. So Professor Noakes found that in his studies that no one really took more than 3 weeks. He gave them 42 days, but he said that he found that it was basically 3 weeks. No one took longer than 3 weeks. And I've seen a lot of people, athletes that have switched over mid-season, find that they had a bit of a funny sort of couple weeks, and then they took off. But a lot of people that I've spoken to, I switched over in the middle of the season as well. I just felt amazing from day one. And I've talked to other people that said there's a bit of a teething period for about 2 weeks, but it wasn't enough to like actually make to reduce their performance. There's a rugby league player here in Australia. I think he plays for Manly, if I'm not mistaken. What's his name? It's Marty Taupau, and he was sort of this, you know, big time player for a long time, and he was sort of in his early 30s, and he's just sort of coming, to the end of his career. He just wasn't as explosive and wasn't doing having the same performances that he used to have. And he said, okay, well, I'm gonna give this carnivore thing a go. And a couple of weeks, he sort of the first weekend he sort of dropped his performance, and they check all these different metrics, how he's running, how fast he's going, how many tackles he's making, everything like that. And he had a dip, and they were like, hey, you need to get your act together. And he just say, look, just bear with me, just give me a chance. Like, I think someone's coming here. The next week, he did a lot better. The week after that, he had like the best performance of his time there. And so he's completely revitalized his career. And it was just sort of a 2 week sort of bubble period. So most people will find that. So it's not like they have to worry about like, well, I'm in the middle of a season, I've got all this training, so I really can't afford to basically lose the next 6 weeks. I didn't lose any time. A lot of people don't lose any time. Some people find that they have a bit of a weird couple weeks, but then after that they're flying with it. If you do that for a few weeks, then eat some carbs or something like that, you're going to again have a bit of a weird week when you're getting back into ketosis. It can take a few days to do that. So your energy levels may not be as good. But I've seen people that even when they just went carnivore for 1 week, they said, I've never felt stronger. That like that 1 week of just eating meat, I've never felt stronger. I never had better energy. So it is individual, but I think that the more meat you eat, the better you're going to be. Um, and the less carbs and less other sort of crap that you eat, the better you're going to be. So I think there's absolutely a huge advantage to even doing this piecemeal. And so you can see, and the thing, and another advantage of that is that you're going to go a month and you're going to feel better than you ever felt in your entire life. After about 2 weeks, you're going to get most of this poison out of your system. You're going to be pretty much keto adapted to a large extent. You're going to be in deep ketosis. Your body's going to be able to make all the blood sugar and glycogen and ketones that you need, and you're going to feel better than you've ever felt in your entire life. And then you're going to be playing out of your skin. You're going to be having the best games and the best performance. You're not going to get tired. You're not going to get sore after you work out. That was one thing that was crazy to me. I realized that I don't get sore after I work out. It doesn't matter how hard I go. It doesn't matter how long it's been since I've been in the gym. You don't get sore. And that's because it's those inflammatory factors in plants that are making you sore. That's one of the plant's ways of saying, hey, back off, don't eat me. I'm going to hurt you if you eat me. And if you just feel great all the time and you're never sore, and then all of a sudden you eat this plant, you're like, oh, my back's hurting, my leg, what the hell is going on? You're like, not eating that plant again, right? But since we're doing this all the time, it's just like, well, this is just normal. It's not normal. It is not normal to be sore for 3 days after you work out. That is not normal. And so when you realize that and you look at your life, I mean, when I was doing this at 38, 2 weeks into this, I just felt so much better than I ever had. And I look back on my entire life, and except for those 5 years in my early 20s, I realized that I felt like crap my entire life. And I was pissed because I realized I didn't have to. I didn't have to feel like garbage. I didn't have to have poor energy. I didn't have to get fat as soon as I stopped working out. It's in between, rugby seasons, I'd lose my muscle mass and I'd put on fat. Why the hell is that? I don't do that now. I maintain sort of 10% around body fat, no exercise. I eat fatty steaks until I choose to stop. And I don't count calories. I don't count macros. I don't even do push-ups. Like today was the first time I actually have gone to the gym in months. And and yet, I maintain a lean muscular physique. And so that pissed me off. And I think that when people do that and they do this for a few weeks, they do this for a month, they feel better than they ever have. And then they go and eat carbs for a week and they realize that it makes them feel like crap. They get sore, their back hurt, their knees hurt, they're sore and tight after the gym. And they're like, damn it, I haven't been sore for a month. This is bullshit. They're not going to want to do that again. I think that's actually a good learning tool that people have, slipping off and just seeing, okay, what is this doing to me? Is it really, I mean, yes, I feel better, but is that just because I'm eating more meat? Then they go to eat this other stuff and they feel wretched. And I say, right, not doing that again. I mean, I don't do this. I've been doing this again for 6 years and I have no interest in eating any plant ever again for the rest of my life. And that's not because people say, well, that takes a lot of discipline. And it really doesn't. It doesn't take any discipline to do exactly what you want to do. And I have no interest in eating any plants because I know exactly what they make me feel like. They make me feel suboptimal. I like feeling my best. I like feeling like a superhuman all the time. I like at 43, turning 44 next week. I like feeling better than I did at 25, 26. I feel much better now than I did in my 20s since I stopped eating carnivore. So, no, I don't think it's a problem to go back and forth. I think if you're just eating a lot more meat, you're going to get a lot out of it. I know people, that play a lot of different sports. There was, gentleman I mentioned to you when we were talking earlier. He plays for the Houston SaberCats. He had me on his podcast, Christian Dreyer. Dyer, and he was saying that he's mostly carnivore. He just maybe has like a bit of stuff here and there, and but it's mostly meat. It's mostly just meat, and he had massive improvement in his health and his performance and his blood work, and that was just doing it sort of half-heartedly, just eating a lot more meat and cutting out most of that other stuff. So there's a huge advantage to it. Um, if you get down to just meat and water, you're going to feel better than you've ever felt in your life. You're going to perform better than you've ever felt in have performed in your life. And I was thinking about this too. I mean, you're still a young guy. You get on this and you get going, like you're gonna be itching to throw the boots back on again and go out and start cracking some skulls, man. Like you will, because like when I was doing this at 38, I felt so good. I'm like, yeah, I got to go hit somebody. Like this is just it's about time. So I think that you'll find that too. And you do this for long enough and you start eating some of this other stuff and you'll see like, wow, that actually made me feel like garbage. I don't want to eat that anymore. But yeah, you will get better either way, just eating more meat and less of the other crap. And I think that most people will trend towards eliminating out things permanently just because of how good they feel.
Yeah, I definitely, towards the later stages of my career, it was just kind of constant soreness. Like, and I remember one particular time, this would have been, back when I was 22, 23, but I played about 14 games in a row and I played in the back row. So I was predominantly a number eight. So there was always a high workload in games. Sometimes it would be 25 plus tackles a game, 25 plus ball carries a game. And through this sort of 14 game period, I remember when I got to about 12 games in, I've never felt pain like this before in my life. It felt like my body was shutting down on me. And I never really was able to get to the bottom of why that was happening. Now, I was playing rugby. Rugby's hard. It's going to be tough. But I sometimes think to myself, like, was there markers around my diet and what I was putting in my body that was causing that? Because there was other guys in the team who had done the same as what I had done, but they were okay. Like I'm sitting telling them, like, I don't feel good. Like this is really, really bad. Like I feel like I'm about to like collapse. I remember telling the coach at the time. The coach was like, "This is just what it's like to play professional rugby. You got to get used to it." And I was kind of like, well, "It doesn't feel like that. This does not feel normal." So, I mean, there's definitely who knows? Maybe there's an opportunity to get back in at some point and start playing again. But I do. This may be one thing that I do regret is maybe not playing around with this a little bit more. I'm doing Carnivore January, so this is the first time in my life that I've stuck to just meat. I'm not going as strict as just red meat. I am having eggs, bacon, and really that's it. So I'm going to stick with that for a month. I might end up changing to maybe do a month of just red meat and see what the difference is. But I certainly so far feel really good. That's me 7 days in, and I've been training hard in the gym. I've been pushing myself, and the sort of month previous to the last week, I didn't do much training at all, and I've not had really any soreness, which has been quite interesting, quite eye opening. Early stages, it's a bit of an experiment to see how we go, but it's cool. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I bet it is funny too. That's one of the things that upset I think most people, the most people, is when I say that I don't get sore. I mean, you see the comments, and I'm sure they'll get comments in this, be like, "That's bullshit. You get sore." It's like, just try it. It's just 2 weeks, no plants, just fatty meat. Like you literally will not get sore. Um, and then some people, well, you still get a bit sore, and they're still drinking coffee or having or power pre-workout drinks and things like that. And of course, those things can throw a wrench in the gears as well. But if you're really clean and you're just eating meat and you're only drinking water, then you really just don't get sore, and you can have much better workouts and you get much better results out of it. So yeah, I mean you're early days on this and you're already feeling those effects. You get another week into this, you're literally going to feel better than you ever have in your life. In the last 2 weeks, you're going to be in this golden zone of just, I mean, you're just going to feel like a god and you just be like, I should have felt like this my whole life. This is bullshit. And yeah, you're like you're saying, you're getting really sore and battered after games. You're going to get hits, you're going to get knocks, all that sort of stuff. So you're still going to get bruised, and you'll still feel pain, but it's so much reduced. If you get bruised and banged up, you get like a shoulder injury, or people have major arthritis. There are orthopedic surgeons. Dr. Baker is one of them. Dr. Gary Feck, he's another orthopedic surgeon here in Australia, who found that he put people on a ketogenic diet. They didn't need joint replacements anymore. It didn't grow their cartilage. It just stopped the expression of pain being so severe that they needed surgery, that they needed a joint replacement. And so that's what he did. People would come into him saying, "Hey, I have all this pain." He's like, "Okay, look, you qualify for a knee replacement. So put you on the books, 3 months, you'll get your surgery, but you need to be on this diet until then. This is a pre-surgery diet. You need to be on this. It's important." Say, okay. The ones who stuck with it oftentimes would call them 2 months after that and say, "Hey, I don't think I need surgery. My knee feels fine." And it's like, great, no problem. See you later. So it massively reduces inflammation. Just higher ketones themselves independently reduce inflammation. So you're taking out things that can cause inflammation, can cause pain. And you're also increasing ketones, which then further reduce it. So you just don't feel it as bad. And so, thinking back on like how sore, I mean, and, sometimes, same thing, I played in the back row. So I played 7 and 8, a lot of 8. And I really liked, 7 and 8 because they're very, very high contact positions. And I really enjoyed that, the physicality and the contact. And, some of these games, before I was, where I was doing carnivore, I mean, I just could barely move for 4 days. I'm 20 years old and I'm just racked with pain. It's just like, oh my God, because, but, I always sort of felt like, the worse I felt, sort of the more proud of myself I was, because there were 15 other people that were feeling 10 times worse than I was because of what I've done to them, because it's mostly me hitting them. That's what I'm smashing myself for. I'm not just getting pummeled. Like, I'm doing the pummeling, and it's, but I'm using my body to do it, so I still felt good about it, but there'd be like 4 days and I'm just creaking along, and that was just gone. When I stopped eating that garbage, I had almost instant recoveries. I just felt amazing all the time. And Sundays I could just get up and like, hey, I can go to the gym, I can go running. It was just, I felt great. I was already recovered. And so, you get a couple more weeks into this and you see how you really feel. You start going on some runs, maybe, have a couple runarounds with like the teams that you're coaching. Like, I think you're going to be very tempted to get back in there and start knocking some heads around.
Yeah, we'll see how we go. I would be honestly, I would be amazed, but I'm not going to say no, and I'm not going to think that it's not going to happen, because who knows? Like, I definitely have felt a difference so far. I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'm going to wrap it
Mhm.
up, because try and keep this under an hour and a half. But the
Sounds good.
when
Sounds
it
good.
comes to this type of eating and consumption with kids, how does that work? Because like I know. A lot of people will try and feed their kids a balanced diet. But what have you come to discover when it comes to younger people?
So, I mean, it's actually most important for kids to eat a biologically appropriate diet because they're developing. You only get one chance at development, and if you don't do that right, you'll never get a chance again. So you and I were adults. We're not going to keep growing. We can optimize our tissues. We can optimize our body, our brain, and our physiology. But we're not going to. Our growth plates are closed. Our brain is the size it's going to be. It's not going to grow further than this. Kids can, you know. So when you look at the fossil record of humans that were eating mammoths, the mammoth hunters during the ice ages, they could be sometimes on average 6'2" to 6'4", average, right? So these were massive people. The Plains Indians in North America, they were just eating bison. They're high fat carnivores, just eating bison and pemmican. They made dried meat and fatty meat. It was like 80% calories from fat. That's what they would eat throughout the year. They didn't really eat anything else because, oh, well, they add berries to it. No, they didn't. They added berries to the pemmican they sold to Europeans because the Europeans wanted the berries. They wanted something sweet in there. The ones they ate themselves generally did not. There's a study in 2001 that pulled a lot of information together, and they found that the Plains Indians that were just eating a carnivore diet were the tallest human beings on Earth. They were the tallest population on Earth. These are Stone Age nomads. They didn't have modern medicine. They didn't have, no one had modern medicine back then, but they didn't have, even what was afforded to Europeans living in cities at the time. They were just out in the Great Plains, just eating buffalo, the tallest human beings on Earth. Now they're not. We're seeing this in real time. We see this in the fossil record. We see immediately after, and this was a textbook from professor at Cambridge, and it said that it sort of showed. I have it on my Instagram. It's sort of pinned to the top, where it's a picture of two skeletons, and I can sort of pull it up there. I don't know if you can sort of see that. You see those two skeletons. The taller one is pre-agriculture, and the shorter one is post-agriculture. That's immediately afterwards, right? So this isn't hundreds of years. This isn't thousands of years. This is the the you know the geological minute after we switched to agriculture. They found that they were shorter. They dropped about 5 inches in height. Their jaws became smaller, tighter. The teeth became crowded, crooked. They didn't have crooked teeth before that. They didn't have a bunch of cavities before that. That's actually nutritional. That's developmental. You either pay for steaks now or pay for braces later with your kids. Like that's how that works. And they had poor wound healing. They had signs of infection like tuberculosis up and down their spine. And I'll read the bottom to you here. It says, this is the sort of blurb at the bottom of the textbook. It says, when populations around the globe started turning to agriculture around 10,000 years ago, regardless of the location and regardless of the type of crop, a similar trend occurred. The height and health of the people declined. Skeletal analysis suggests that these Neolithic peoples experienced greater physiological stress due to undernutrition and infectious disease. So that's what happens to your kids. So if you're feeding your kids just meat, what they're designed to eat, they're going to be like that pre-agricultural person. They're going to be taller. They're going to have bigger brains. They're going to have better teeth. They're going to have better immune systems. They're going to have better wound healing. They're going to have lower rates of infectious disease. If you feed them the crap that we're eating now, they're going to be like that. They're going to be worse because now we have high octane garbage. We have things that didn't exist in nature even a year ago, let alone 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. And we're giving this stuff to people. We're giving this stuff to kids. This is nonsense. This is not food. It has calories. It has some vitamins in it. That's not food. And so we saw that change in real time with the Native Americans. Tallest human beings on earth now, they're much shorter than that. They are not the tallest human beings on earth, and they have a much higher rate of chronic disease than even the rest of Americans because they didn't have 10,000 years to adapt and change to agriculture. They had the last 100 years. That's not enough time. And so they're actually more affected by this inappropriate diet, by these plant defense chemicals and not getting the proper adequate nutrition. Another and probably the most glaring difference is brain capacity, brain size. Pre-agriculture was 11% larger than it is now. Not only is it 11% larger than it is now, it's 11% larger than it was immediately after agriculture. So the brains didn't develop as well. You need to be in ketosis to develop your brain. This is why kids that are breastfeeding fetuses in the womb, they're in ketosis. And that's because the ketones cross the blood-brain barrier freely. They don't need insulin. And they reconstitute into fatty acids and are used as a physical structure of the brain. The majority of your brain is fat and cholesterol. And without that fat and cholesterol, your brain can't grow to its capacity and to its genetic capacity. And so we're getting average adult male brain size drop by 11% immediately after that. Adult female brain capacity dropped by 17% immediately after agriculture. So for kids, it's even more important for them to eat properly because they have a chance to develop. They're going to develop smarter. They're going to have bigger brains. They're going to have better teeth. They're going to have better eyesight. They're going to be taller. They're going to be more muscular. They're going to be more healthy. They're going to be more neurologically intact and developed. And so, if you want your kids playing sports, this is what you want to do. If you want them being academics, this is what you want to do. If you want them to be healthy, if you want them to be as healthy as they possibly can be, again, talking about mental health issues, that's plaguing kids these days is these mental health issues, depression, anxiety, and things like that. These have been clinically proven by Professor Chris Palmer, by Dr. Georgia Eade, and Dr. Rachel Brown in Scotland. They've shown that this can clinically reverse schizophrenia, major depression, major anxiety, OCD, bipolar, ADHD, and help to reverse autism if you get it early enough. And even in adults, it can actually really help people function much more appropriately. So this is a major, major, major um, tool for everybody, but it is so important for people at extremes of age, elderly, because they need a lot more nutrition, they need a lot more help to keep their brains and their bodies working. But kids, most importantly, because they'll never get a chance to develop again. And if they don't do it right this time, they're stuck where they're at. If you think about it, just one more thing. If you think about it, none of us developed to our genetic potential. None of us are as big, smart, fast, and strong as we should be. You and I were about the same height. I'm a little shorter than you. I'm like 6'3", but around 240. You and I should have both been about 6 inches taller and about 50 pounds heavier. That's what we probably would have been if our moms were carnivores when we were in the womb and breastfeeding and then grown up like that. Because that's about what you get. You get like these people drop by 5 inches pre and post agriculture, but the pre-agriculture people were likely already hunter gathering, whereas and so in that textbook they dropped from 5'9" to 5'4", 5'5", right? But remember, the ones that were just eating meat, they weren't gathering, they were just hunting. The apex predators, they were just eating a mammoth. They were on average 6'2" to 6'4". So on average, they dropped by 8 to 10 inches. So realistically, we should be much bigger than we are now, and that really pisses me off. Like you and I should have both been pushing 7 feet, running a 4.340, and just crushing people, and then playing virtuoso piano at the Philharmonic that night. I mean, it's just bullshit that we got, that we didn't get what we were owed.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about that. I've got a younger sister and an older brother. We're all from the same mum and dad. I'm 6'4", my brother's 5'10", and my sister's 5'3". I don't know why I'm bigger. I don't know, maybe it was something that I was eating. Maybe I was eating more steak. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
But it is really interesting to think about. But listen, Dr. Chaffee, I'll cut it at that. I'm sure we will chat again. It's been honestly really, really insightful. I've enjoyed the conversation. I've been watching a lot of your Instagram, a lot of your YouTube videos and stuff like that. If anybody is interested in learning more about what you talk about, please head over. Look at the content. There's so much out there that you've done. This is probably one of about 1,000 podcast episodes you've done, and every one of them that I've seen has been brilliant. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and being part of this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a blast.